So, 5 years ago, yesterday, Friday the 13th, 2020, was when we found out that coming Monday, San Francisco was shutting down for COVID. So it was 5 years ago this morning. My girlfriend at the time and I went to Safeway at Church and Market here in San Francisco at 7 a.m. to stock up. It was already full. We had to wait in the parking lot for each of us to get a shopping cart. It was near mayhem inside. I saw people get into a fight over a chicken. And we stocked up. We both filled our carts. There were no paper towels in the store. There was no toilet paper anywhere in the store. But our corner market had both, so we never ran out of those. There was no hand sanitizer when that was still a thing. Almost nobody was wearing masks at that point. It was a kind of a surreal mayhem experience. And then, we both, she's in a 2-bedroom apartment, so we each set up our own little home office in each one of the bedrooms, and we had our webcams and our dual monitors, and both of our offices had also closed down. So we were going to be working remotely, and everything closed. And boy howdy, that started a ride for the entire country, for the entire planet. I think that, and that's when, Trump obviously lied, as was proven by the Bob Woodward tapes, which Bob Woodward didn't release for like another 3 years. He had Trump on tape saying he knew it was transmitted respiratorily, that it was airborne, that it wasn't just spread via surfaces. Trump downplayed it from day one, said that it was going to be gone by April when the temperatures warmed up. He said, he said so many things back then, man. But, I think COVID and our collective nationwide experience of COVID, we had 4% of the world's population, and I think we had 20 or 25% of the world's COVID deaths, like 1.2 million people or something like that. And COVID broke this country, and COVID broke a lot of people in this country. It wasn't long before we started seeing anti-maskers. It wasn't long before we started seeing states like Florida, which, reopened everything very early on. And Florida had a dramatically high per capita death rate for COVID. And they were playing games with their numbers. And there was that one woman who was a public health employee in the state of Florida, and she did a whistleblower thing, and then she got fired, and then like the police raided her house with their guns drawn while her little kids were at home as retaliation for that. But COVID definitely broke a lot of high profile people like Joe Rogan. I think COVID completely fucking broke his brain, man. And I've talked about it before, like a month before everything shut down. So like mid-February, I remember listening to an episode of his, because I would check his calendar every week, or whatever. And if he had somebody who was going to be interesting on, I would usually listen to, an episode at least every other week. And at that time, during the buildup, there was this one doctor, I think he's from Minnesota, named Dr. Michael Osterholm, who was kind of ever present on all the cable news channels talking about COVID and what was coming. And this episode with Dr. Osterholm being interviewed by Joe Rogan, first they spent a significant amount of time talking about the miracle of vaccines. And Joe Rogan spoke very eloquently about how incredible vaccines are and how vaccines have saved millions and millions and millions of people, and how in favor he was of vaccines until the COVID vaccine came out. And then he and Aaron Rodgers were on their little ivermectin kick or whatever, hydroxychloroquine. But then they spoke about, like what's coming. And Joe Rogan was like pushing Dr. Osterholm to say, how bad is this going to be? And so this is mid-February 2020, a month before everything shut down. Everybody's afraid. Nobody knows what the hell's going on. And Dr. Osterholm was like, this is going to last for a year or two, and it's probably going to cost somewhere around 600,000 American lives. And he had never said that on a cable news program before. He immediately disappeared from cable news because everybody said he was fear-mongering. The number ended up being double that, and it lasted for more than that period of time that he had discussed. I think there are a lot of things on both sides, left and right, response-wise to COVID, that were, turned out to be not the greatest, I mean, and this is data, this is documented. In red counties that voted for Donald Trump after vaccines were available, the death rates from COVID in those counties were dramatically higher than they were in blue counties that had voted for Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton, where vaccines were available. Educated people got vaccinated. People in red counties listened to right-wing media and determined that, the vaccine was a government conspiracy. It would make you magnetic. Bill Gates had put 5G chips in the vaccine. All kinds of crazy shit, man. And it's like, I think COVID, so in 2017 is when the whole Q thing came out. And that set off so many people on the right. It just really set off their whole conspiracy theory thing. And I remember reading a lot of articles around that period of time about how the Q obsession thing had legit just completely destroyed people's families. And then COVID hit. And these people on the right are already primed for conspiracy stuff, and COVID just fucking turbocharged it and sent it to the moon, man. Everything became a conspiracy. And to this day, there are people on the right who think that Dr. Anthony Fauci should be executed. Marjorie Taylor Greene wants him put in prison for crimes against humanity. Rand Paul wants Dr. Fauci prosecuted. I mean, just shit that we have never seen before. In an era when we're all walking around every single day with a device in our pocket that can access pretty much every known piece of knowledge to the entirety of humanity, including science and data and medicine. And we've never come back from that we've never come back. And, you know, and it's like, and I mean, just remember this timeline. It's like COVID hits, everything shuts down in the middle of March of 2020 as the primaries are going on for the Democratic nomination for president. Over the course of that summer were the Black Lives Matter protests while the presidential campaign was going on. And then we had Election Day 2020, and then Donald Trump was doing everything he could until the end of the year to overturn the results of an election. When you step back and think about the shit that was going on during that year of 2020, it's insane to look back. It's insane to just look at that year. And then we had January 6th, 2021. We all watched the United States Capitol get fucking ransacked by Trump supporters. I mean, I don't think it's a stretch to say that as a nation, we all have collective PTSD from that year. And it's like, you know, I was still working from home on January 6th. I watched it live on television. And I was in California. I was in San Francisco. And I had a 3 p.m. Zoom hearing with another attorney and a judge. And by that point, it's 6 p.m. East Coast time. The insurrectionists were leaving the Capitol. It was largely over. And I remember getting on that 3 p.m. Zoom call and looking at the other attorney and the judge. And I was like, are we still doing this hearing as though that didn't just happen? They tried to overthrow the United States government today. And the other attorney just had this kind of blank, shocked look on his face too. And the judge was like, we're here. It's going to take 15 minutes. Let's just get it done. And then we can go back to whatever. And so we did this hearing. And all three of us were just kind of phoning it in, man. But that year, you know, and it's like the woman who I was dating at the time, you know, she was Filipina. And in San Francisco, throughout 2020, you know, there were random violent attacks on Chinese people in San Francisco, including very elderly Chinese people. A couple of them were killed. And, you know, so my girlfriend at the time was absolutely terrified to leave our apartment. And you know, there were so many layers to all of that. Not to mention the fact, in the middle of all of that shit, not to mention the fact that I got COVID on July 4th of 2020. And I had it bad. I had a very, very bad time with COVID. I was in bed for a month, 4 or 5 weeks. You know, I lost 15 or 20 pounds. And the lingering symptoms from that lasted for over a year. All kinds of neurological issues. And I mean, it was just bad. That 2020 going into 2021 was a horrifically traumatic time for this entire country and for everybody who lives here. And, you know, my brother makes the argument frequently that it's like, you know, 90% of the shit that we see from people on TikTok is just untreated trauma, unresolved trauma. And I think so much of it can be traced back, you know, to that 12-month period from like February 2020 to February 2021. And all of the fucking shit that went down and the hundreds of thousands of people who died. And Donald Trump saying, you know, telling people to somehow get some disinfectant inside their body along with UV light, you know, and well, you know, after he put Jared Kushner in charge of our COVID response. Just an unimaginable amount of trauma from that period of time for every single person who lived in this country and around the world. But this country, I think, because of all those other things that were going on that year, it's just. And then I remember in the spring of 2021, it's like the vaccine's out, everybody's getting vaccinated. And that was the last time I went back to Ohio. And I went back for like 8 days or something. Saw family, saw a bunch of friends. And right when I came back, in like the middle of May, was when that first Delta variant hit. And it took off again. It took off again. And then we had that other variant that started with an O, and it was just these cycles. And I just remember being like, fuck, man, when is this going to end? When is this going to be over? When is this going to end? And just seeing, and reading stories about these anti-mask, anti-vax, COVID hoax assholes, showing up at the hospital, abusing medical personnel, either just abusing the shit out of medical personnel or, demanding when they show up at the hospital and they can't breathe. It's like, okay, I'll get vaccinated now. And it's a little late for that, dude. But it just brought out, I think 2020, between COVID and vaccines and masks and Black Lives Matter protests and the election and the Stop the Steal and January 6th, all of that stuff combined brought out the absolute worst in the absolute worst people in this country. And they just became these turbocharged, dumb, gullible assholes. And they've never reverted back. Ah, man, what a time to be alive.